Hey y'all, it's Friday and it's the last Friday of the month. Happy birthday to those of you who celebrated a birthday in the month of February. Don't forget to send us your pictures on Instagram, tag us, shout us out, and we'll shout you back out as well. Today, we are bringing a sex therapist to the platform. That's right, a professional sex therapist. Personally, I think this may be one of the most misunderstood areas of counseling. But today, our guest will help us explore intimacy and some of the issues that we face in relationships because of intimacy or the lack thereof. But first, your little known Black history facts of the day. The 15th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution granted African American men the right to vote by declaring that the rights of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied by the United States or by any state on an account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. Although it was ratified on February 3rd of 1870, the promise of the 15th Amendment would not be fully realized for almost a century. Through the use of poll taxes, literacy tests, and other means, Southern states were able to effectively disenfranchise African Americans. It would take the passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 before the majority of African Americans in the South were even registered to vote. That's your Black history fact of the day. I need you guys to go get your wine, your liquor, your sports drink, your milk, your tea, whatever it is. We're going to sip it all today because coming up next, I have my guest, a sex therapist for you. You're listening to Camouflaged Beauty, a podcast of shared experiences for military women. Welcome back, everyone. Today, I brought in a professional, Dr. Ina Ferguson, a sexual being, Christian, wife, mother, daughter, sister, friend, clinical psychologist, sex therapist, and intimacy coach will help us explore some intimacy today. How are you, Dr. Ferguson?
I'm doing great. Thank you.
Tell us a little bit about your profession and what it is that you do.
So a sex therapist or an intimacy coach helps individuals or couples get in touch with themselves sexually. And so if you're having difficulties with your sex life or experiencing pleasure, my job is to help figure out what's going on or what's keeping you from experiencing that pleasure and living like these absolutely amazing sex lives.
Awesome. That sounds amazing. I think that's something all our listeners can appreciate today. What type of relationship issues are typically addressed by a sex therapist?
The biggest issue that comes in with relationships usually has to do with a mismatch of drive. So one partner really has a high sex drive and the other partner would have a low sex drive or a lower sex drive. And so there's one partner who's not satisfied in the relationship because of that. And so we do work on compromise and how can you work that out in a relationship. Mm-hmm. Some of the things will have to do with, figuring out if the person with the lower sex drive has some sort of medical issue that may be depressing their sex drive, or if the person with the higher sex drive has some kind of medical issue that's increasing their sex drive beyond what it was when they initially started in the relationship, and just try to find some common ground there. Another issue that comes in would be when someone has a kink that they may want to explore, and they haven't really talked about that with their partner. It's usually about one person being dissatisfied, or even in the kink situation, they may not be dissatisfied, but there's something more that they want. And so they're afraid to talk about it. I mean, sex is as natural as breathing, but for some reason we have such a hard time just talking about it. And so sex therapists come in to help bridge that gap between in communication and to help figure out what are some things that could be creating difficulties.
Gotcha. From your area of expertise, how common would you say sexual difficulties are in relationships?
I would say that they're pretty common. A lot of the women that I deal with have hangups from their childhood or from the church, from their parents. They're told, be good girls, don't have sex. Sex is bad. And then, but you can have sex when you're married, and then you get married and you're like, but if I have sex, I'm bad. Like, how do I reconcile this?
Right.
And so, or if you explore your sexuality before you get married, you're labeled, right? As a woman, you're labeled. And so we've traumatized women away from the pleasure part of their sexuality to believe that they're not supposed to want it, like it, have it, right? So there are a lot of issues right there because women don't have the knowledge of what it means to be a sexual being, or they're conflicted because they have these sexual desires and they don't know how to express them without being a slut, right? So when, in a relationship, why not be a slut? I mean, that's the whole
idea.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. But that trauma that's perpetuated by our parents and by the church so early on just really sets us up for sexual problems in our relationships.
Makes total sense. So, speaking of that, our culture today seems to be overly sexualized. How does this impact relationships?
Well, I mean, there is this sexual freedom for women that I think had a positive impact on relationships sexually. Though there's also, when you talk about the sexualization, we have to talk about porn in this, and porn puts really bad ideas into our brains about what sex is supposed to be, right? And so porn has a place, if it turns you on and it helps to increase the pleasure between you and your partner, if you see things that you might want to try, that's all good. Porn is not all bad. Ethically sourced porn is better than some of the things that we get, free. But it puts into our minds that sex is supposed to be one way, and it's supposed to be a gift given to a man. Women are supposed, everything that a man does to a woman, she enjoys, even if it's degrading or demeaning. And that's what sex is supposed to be. And you're supposed to have an orgasm every time.
Which we know is not true or realistic.
Right. It sets us up for failure, right? It sets us up for this unrealistic expectation of what sex is supposed to be. But I do think, moving away from porn and into, mainstream, I think the conversation about sex coming out into the open makes it so much better. It makes it easier to talk about. Like, you should be able to talk about sex the same way you talk about the weather. It's cold outside. I think I want to have an orgasm for breakfast. Whatever it is, you should be able to talk about that, with your partners, with your girlfriends, with your parents, it shouldn't, with your children, it shouldn't be such a taboo thing because it's so natural.
Right. Well, let's talk about intimacy a bit. It seems as if intimacy takes a back burner to the act of sex itself. What are your thoughts on that?
So intimacy comes in various forms, right? So there is physical intimacy, that would be sex or all the things that go into sex, but you have intellectual intimacy, you have, other types. And I think when we get focused on the physical intimacy, we forget about all the other things and how much those other parts of intimacy go into the pleasure of physical intimacy. So, for someone like me who likes to read, I need to be able to talk about things, right? So I can get turned on from a really good conversation. And so if you're not really open to be vulnerable with me and discuss those things and let me know what's on your mind, I'm going to have a much harder time being physically intimate with you. It doesn't mean you can't have sex without that type of intimacy. Sometimes sex is just about the physical pleasure, but you miss out on so much when you exclude the intimacy. Because if you think about it, sex is the most vulnerable position you can put yourself in with another person. It's the most intimate way you can be with a person. Why would you not want to build up to that and have some aspects of vulnerability and intimacy outside of sharing your body with someone?
Right. You're right. Good questions for us to consider. When it comes on to sex therapists, because I do think that your profession is often misunderstood. I remember putting a thing on Facebook. I'm like, hey, I would really love a sex therapist to find one to interview. And I had all these guys respond and they're like, I'm a sex therapist. I'm a sex therapist. And I'm like, no, I mean an actual professional. So I just think that they think it's a joke or it's not a real thing.
Right.
So how does someone choose between a sex therapist and a relationship counselor?
So your relationship counselor should be able to talk to you about sex issues in your relationship, but not everyone is trained. So, I mean, very few therapists are trained in sexual health and understand the sexual response cycle, which is just, what happens when you from excitement to orgasm, like what happens in that cycle. They rarely understand what medications can affect your sex life or what, and they're not all therapists are open to talking about all types of sex, right? So if I mentioned one partner may be interested in kink, and the kink community could be anything from BDSM to sharing your partner, right? So it could be in any wide range of things that are outside of what we consider vanilla sex. And if your relationship therapist is not open to hearing about that, you're going to shut down and you're not going to be able to get everything you need out of that relationship with your therapist.
Right.
A sex therapist is sensitive to all types of things. There is nothing you can talk about that's off the table when it comes to talking with your sex therapist. Now, if you have a particular sex therapist who doesn't, I don't deal in surrogacy, right? Surrogate sex. I could point you to someone who does, who is trained, who is certified, who has been through some sort of rigor, and they're not just out there doing sex work, which is, again, that's okay as well. If you're a sex worker and you want therapy, you might come to a sex therapist, not because you need help with the sex part, but because a sex therapist is open to speaking with you and there's no judgment in the work that you do and things like that. So you have to tease apart, what is it that you're going for and whether or not this person has the training in it. I did an extra year beyond my doctorate in order to be trained in sexual health and sex therapy.
Okay. Well, how do you perceive sex being different for singles versus those in a relationship?
Well, it's just the main difference for singles, if you're having sex with multiple partners, is about the health part, right? You're taking care of yourself and being healthy. In terms of the problems that occur, they're sometimes the same because we don't talk about what there's no intimacy. If we're not intimate if we're not vulnerable and talking about, what we desire in a relationship, then that's what creates problems. And I say in a relationship, a single person having sex with another single person has created a relationship, even if that relationship only lasts for that one act, right? So if you both aren't going into this relationship with the understanding that this is a single event, or, and if we like it, we may explore it some more. If you're not clear that you're not looking for a relationship, if you're not clear about what you like and don't like, it can be a bad experience if you're not communicating. Same thing for in relationships. The biggest difference is in a relationship, there's some, there's some desire to maintain that relationship, right? And so, there's a commitment there. That's not there when you're talking about sex with singles.
Yeah, makes sense. Now let's talk about some traumas. How does one limit or start to recognize that they're taking sexual traumas into multiple relationships?
So if you're having the same issue over and over again, that should be a clue that there's something going on. It may or may not be trauma, but if it's the same issue over and over again, that's really a situation where you need to think, what's going on. If I'm the common denominator in the problem that continues to happen, maybe I need to explore this. Maybe I need to step back from the sexual relationship and figure out what's going on and heal those traumas before I take them into someone else, into another relationship.
Right. So I hear you, Doc. I do. And I can speak from personal experience as well. It's not always easy to communicate, whether it's sexual traumas or barriers to intimacy with your partner. So what would you suggest?
Well, and that's where therapy can be helpful. And at this, at that point, if you're just trying to figure out, I'm not sure if you're like, I'm not sure what's going on. My partner and I are having difficulty communicating or matching, or our sex life is not good. And I just want to know what's going on. That's a situation where you might be, need to be open to therapy. And that's when you need to be open to therapy. The might part is whether or not you need a sex therapist at that point, right? So you may start out with a relationship, with a couples therapist or counselor. You might start out with something like an EAP, that's free through your job. You might use your insurance. Sex therapists typically are not reimbursed by insurance. So a lot of times you're going to be paying out of pocket for a sex therapist. So you may start with a relationship therapist. If you know that this is what you want, like I know that I want to make sure that my sex life is better, and whether it's intimacy or not, I feel like that I really want to explore this with a sex therapist. That's when you could go ahead and see a sex therapist, and they can figure that out. A good therapist is going to be able to figure out with you together what's the root cause of the issue.
Okay, so let's veer off for a second. We talked insurance for a second. For military members, because most of our listeners are military and veteran women, is this something that's covered under TRICARE that you're aware of?
It is not covered under TRICARE in the traditional sense. Mm-hmm. So if you see a licensed professional, a person who's a licensed professional. So that could be a licensed clinical social worker. It could be a licensed psychologist. It could be a licensed marriage and family therapist. And you're going in for couples therapy related to your relationship as a couple. That is covered by TRICARE. If you're seeing someone whose doctorate is in sexology, or who have their entire training is related to sex therapy, that's not going to be covered.
Mm.
And a few of the VAs are actually have sexual health clinics. And they used to be, the sexual health clinics used to be just for men with ED, erectile mm-hmm. disorder. But now there's so much focus on women's health. And there's so many psychologists out there who are starting sexual health clinics within the VAs. So I know that the Atlanta VA has one. I know that the Columbia VA in Ohio will be having one soon. And a couple of other VAs are starting the sexual health clinics that are, and so it doesn't, if you're a veteran and and you have benefits that allow you to have treatment at the VA, you're able to get sex therapy through the VA.
That's amazing. I was not aware of that. So thank you for that information.
I just want to point out the reason for that is that we've seen so many issues coming out of the military with sexual health. And there are many reasons. For men coming out, in the military, there are underlying psychological issues that they are not dealing with that will affect their sexual health, and what the military does is hand out Viagra, and they don't really deal with it. And that only works if you have desire, but you're having functional issues, right? Desire is usually the issue when it's psychological. It's not functional. It's a function of desire.
Right.
For women in the military, they've been defeminized. So your job in the military is to not be feminine, right? That's sort of, it's underlying. It's not, you're not told to stop being feminine, but there's this undercurrent of suppressing your femininity. And so that, on top of if you've deployed and you have PTSD, or if you've experienced military sexual trauma, all of those things will create a problem for you sexually. And so we see far more sexual health issues in our military population. So that's why the sexual health clinics are becoming so popular in the VA.
Well, that's a good thing. That means that they are paying attention and giving the community what it is that they really need. So I'm actually really glad to hear that. And I will be doing my research on that as well.
And I want the community to know that it's out there, but also that if this is what you're experiencing, you're not alone. You're not the only one who is having difficulty with desire, who feels like sex is a chore and not pleasurable. All of these things are, and when I say common, it's not everybody in the military. So if you're like, oh, I have a slamming sex drive and I'm not, like I tell my followers, yay you. That's good. But I'm speaking to the people who are experiencing difficulties. You are not alone in this, and there is help. There are treatments that are available, not medication, but therapy that's available that can help you increase your desire and increase your pleasure.
Yeah, no, that's awesome information. So earlier this month, we had a guest who had recently gone through a divorce. Pretty common these days. Now, everyone's going to face something differently, but what kind of basic information would you give to a woman who may have been in a long-term relationship, married, for example, who is now transitioning to the single life as far as sex and intimacy?
I think this is a perfect time to get to know yourself and get to know what it is you like and don't like. You really need to be mindful about what sensations you feel in your body, becoming aware of what turns you on, and to explore yourself. I think during that transition, coming out of a relationship, it's a really good time just to figure out what didn't work. And speaking sexually, specifically, is to really get to know yourself, get to know the parts of your vagina, get to know your clitoris, touch it, look at it, understand it, be able to tell somebody, the next person, where it is and what to do with it, how you like it, And so this is a perfect opportunity, I think, for women to explore themselves when they are transitioning from one relationship, transitioning out of a relationship before they even think about getting into another one.
Gotcha. Now, as far as being single, what advice would you give the single community, men and women, that could help with their intimacy and their sex drive while they're dating casually?
So the intimacy part is really, and I know that a lot of us have walls up because people have hurt us when we've been vulnerable. And there's a way to be vulnerable without giving your entire self away, right? And so if you're not in a place where you're ready to give your entire self away, think about how you can open up and be vulnerable with your partner, your potential partner, or the person that you're going on a date with, enough to be able to draw them into your space, and you can be intimate in that way. So this is not a time to open up traumas. It's not a time to talk about every past sexual experience, not on a first date, not on a second date, maybe not even on a third date. But it is a situation where you want to start to open up and be able to connect with a person on a level outside of, just the physical attraction. I mean, that's what gets you to the table, right? That's what gets you on the date, the physical attraction.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with that. you can be physically attracted and aroused as much as you want. But being open and honest and vulnerable with a person is really, Daring Greatly is a book that I read by Brene Brown. And she talks a lot about being vulnerable and how that is the gateway to just an amazing life with someone else, and just to be an amazing life for yourself. So definitely vulnerability is something I would say think about and really, figure out where your boundary is for vulnerability so that you can engage in intimate conversations with someone you're dating.
Perfect. Now, ma'am, where can we find you? If we need to look you up, if we're in your states, how can we get in contact with you?
So I'm at bepositivelyintimate.com. You can find me on Instagram and Facebook at Positively Intimate. Those are the main ways you can reach me. On my webpage, I have a contact sheet. You can send me an email through my contact sheet. But yeah, I'm licensed in Georgia. So if you're trying to get reimbursed for insurance, it would have to be through Georgia. But I do intimacy coaching, and that coaching does cover any state.
Any final thoughts for us, Dr. Ayane?
Just really want to say that pleasure is your birthright. You have a right to pleasure in your life. And so if you're not experiencing pleasure in your sex life, that's something to explore and really think about and discuss. Have that conversation with your partner. Explore it for yourself so you know what pleasure is when you are discussing it with your partner. My goal is to see as many people out there having positively intimate, pleasurable sex lives.
That sounds amazing to, I think, anyone listening. Who doesn't want to have a great sex life all the time? And I like how you said, hey, well, let's have sex for breakfast. I want an orgasm for breakfast. I'm going to have to try that and see how my partner responds to that one.
Exactly.
Dr. Ayane, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. You can find us on the book, IG, or Twitter. Email us your stories to camobeautystories@gmail.com. That's it for me, y'all. Until next time, be kind to your body, soul, and mind.